Hi, in this video, we're going to learn how to integrate the Prove SDK. The Prove SDK requires that you take care of some prerequisites before you commence integration. The first is you need to set up your Mono dashboard. Once your Mono dashboard is set up, you can create a Prove app within your dashboard. The Prove app basically looks like this. We're going to be using test mode for this demo, and you can see within the Proof app, I have access to my test key as well as my secret key, which is important for authorizing API calls. I've also attached a webhook URL here. I'll be using webhook.site for the sake of this demo. And I have provided it by clicking on add webhook. So I've attached it so I can use it to listen to webhook events. When you have that taken care of, it's important to note that the integration process requires 3 steps. The first step is making a call to the initiate endpoint. So this involves initiating a proof session. The second step involves the user session setup, which involves using an SDK or using the proof link. But for the sake of this video, we're going to focus on the SDK integration flow. And then the third step involves the identity verification flow for the customer. So how is step 1 achieved? To achieve step 1, you have to make a call to the initiate proof endpoint. This is what the URL looks like. It requires that you pass in a couple of parameters for the user, like the name, phone number, identity, and so on. But not all these fields are required. The required fields are the customer name, the customer phone, the reference, KYC level, bank account, and you are good to go. So the bank account field basically takes in a Boolean value of true or false, using that to determine if you are interested in pulling bank account information from that customer or not. The KYC level are 3. We have tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Tier 1 basically requires that your customers pass in BVN, NIN, as well as carry out a facial recognition to complete the proof flow. Tier 2 requires that customers pass in the BVN, NIN, as well as a government-issued identification document before carrying out the facial recognition flow to complete the proof flow. Tier 3 requires validating the BVN, NIN, government, and address of that customer, then facial verification before they can complete the verification flow. Now, these are some of the most essential things to have in mind. When this API call is made successfully, this is what the response body looks like. You get an ID, then you get a customer ID, then the Mono URL, and so on. This ID here is very important because that is what you need to successfully initiate the widget using the SDK. This is what the SDK documentation for proof looks like. For getting started, you can see here that it's a requirement that you set up your Mono dashboard, and then you can proceed to install your packages depending on the package manager that you use, either npm or yarn. You proceed to install the proof package within your app. Certain parameters to keep in mind for the SDK integration are the onSuccess callback function. This function is triggered when the customer has completed the verification flow on the proof widget. The second parameter here is the onClose callback function. The onClose callback function is triggered when the customer closes the widget before completing the verification flow. The onLoad callback function is triggered when the widget loads. The onEvent callback function returns events as well as event messages. And then the request ID is the important parameter I spoke about here, which is very important for initiating the widget when you are making use of the SDK flow. Now you can always come back to this documentation to read it thoroughly, but this is what our setup looks like. So the next step now is we're going to go through the flow end to end to see what this looks like. We're going to start from the very first step, that is calling the initiation API, all the way to seeing how customers will interact with this widget. We're going to be using sandbox mode for this purpose. So this is the first step. When you are interacting with the SDK, the first thing that you need to do is to ensure that you integrate the proof initiation endpoint. So the proof initiation endpoint will take in this request payload. As you can see here, I'm passing in name, phone number, and so on. I've made this call already, and this is what a successful response looks like. I have obtained my ID here, which is going to be very essential for initiating the widget. The next step now involves passing this ID onto the SDK for the widget to get initiated. Now, this is what my basic setup for the SDK looks like. As you can see, I have already installed the proof package and I am importing it on this line. I also have my request ID here, my on event callback function, on success, and on close callback function. So this is what I need for a basic setup. So I'm passing this ID, which I obtained from the call here. I'm hard coding it here, right? Because I didn't integrate it in this particular, the request ID variable, so that you can successfully initiate the widget. I've implemented a button here that will enable me to manually trigger the widget. So given that our setup is complete and we have our request ID here, which is being dynamically passed here, though hard coded from this level, the next thing now is for us to run this code locally. So I have this setup running now on localhost 3000, and this is what it currently looks like. So I have the open proof button, which I created so that on click, we can trigger the widget to open up. So the widget opens up and your customers can click on continue to proceed. It's important to note that the reason why I'm getting the welcome back message here is because I have used that same information to initiate proof and completed the flow before, right? So the flow after here is going to largely be the same for new customers as well, because you have to verify yourself as a customer on the proof widget. So the first step involves getting an OTP sent to your phone number, which is verified on the widget, and then you can proceed. So this screen comes up where you are required to pass in your BVN. So since we're in sandbox, I'll just provide random numbers here and continue. And then for NIN, I will also provide random numbers here and click on continue. So other information are pre-filled here based on my actual info. And then I can click on grant access to proceed. So when I want to grant access, I can grant one-time access or I can grant continuous access. So I will choose one-time access and I will provide an expiration date for when that access should be revoked. And then I'll click on confirm. And then I will click give temporary access. So the next step is the facial recognition step. So you grant permission from your browser and then your image is verified. Once this is done, the widget closes up, and then you can carry out any action that you want to at this stage of your integration. As your customers go through the proof flow, we trigger a number of webhook events. The first webhook event is the verification initiated webhook event. This webhook event is triggered when a session has been created for a customer. The second webhook event that is triggered is the verification successful webhook event. This webhook event is triggered when a customer has successfully completed the flow and has been verified. The third webhook event that is triggered is the verification cancelled webhook event. This webhook event is triggered when a customer cancels the data verification process. The fourth webhook event that is triggered is the verification expired webhook event. This webhook event is triggered when a customer's data verification expires after 24 hours of not completing the verification flow. This is what the webhook event looks like. It's important to note that for the proof product, there are a lot of other APIs that can be called. We have the fetch customer details endpoint. This takes in the reference of the customer for the proof initiated session. We have the fetch all details endpoint. We have the blacklisting endpoint. We have the whitelisting customer endpoint. And we have the data revoke endpoint. These are all endpoints that help carrying out multiple processes for the proof product.